I'm greatly pleased that Bob Henderson has allowed my team and I to present our research that we've been working on over the past couple months. My name is Clay Posey. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Management in the College of Business here at the University of Central Florida in Orlando, Florida. And my team members who are joining me on here are Dr. Mindy Schoss. She's my co-PI on the grant that provided the funding for this research and is an associate professor in industrial organizational psychology. And Miss Alyssa Perez and Mr. Richard Curry are our two PhD students who are also out of IO psychology, who are working with us on this particular project. Before we get into our findings and what we're going to try to answer from our research question standpoint is, well, first, let me acknowledge support, because that's always a good thing. We did receive support from the National Science Foundation, an organization in the United States that funds scientific research endeavors of faculty members as well as private businesses in the United States. And so the obligatory boilerplate message right here is this material is based upon work supported by the NSF. There's the grant number there. And then any opinions or findings or conclusions that are expressed in this presentation are those of us, the authors, and do not necessarily reflect the views of the National Science Foundation itself. Now, having said that, I think it's important for us to talk very briefly about how we approach cybersecurity. And the way we do that, the way I do that, found most beneficial, is to introduce our friend Stanley. So in the very middle, we have Stanley, who is going to be our lone representative of all the human factor elements when it comes to cybersecurity. And in our mind, the way we approach cybersecurity are the technological components that are on the bottom are enablers. Those are the pieces of equipment, the digital boxes that allow Stanley to do his work throughout the day. That is where most of the influence on cybersecurity is in the technology components. Now, that's not to say that whoever's listening here doesn't fully realize that the human being is, I will argue, is the most important element in the cybersecurity chain. Notice I didn't say weakest link. We'll talk about that in just a little bit, but is the most important link in organizational cybersecurity. And what we are doing in our research is we fully acknowledge over here on the lower left-hand corner this digital domain that enables Stanley to do his work. But there's also an analog domain. Anytime data is on Stanley's screen and he reads it, well, that's in the analog domain at that point. And regardless of sanctions or rewards, Stanley still has some choices to make in regard to what he does with the data and information that emerges from the digital domain to the analog domain. And so not only are we interested, of course, or acknowledging this foundation of technology that enables Stanley here, but we're also very much interested in the forces that exist above Stanley that could influence and do influence his attention span, his mindfulness, his awareness. All of these factors end up compounding so that they influence his daily decision making. We'll talk about malicious and non-malicious behaviors and intentions in a little bit, but it's important to understand that this is our mindset. We're aware of the digital domain, but this presentation and the research is very much focused on what we call the analog domain and how they influence Stanley, in particular during this COVID season. In addition to that, I said that I purposefully did not say that Stanley was the weakest link, because that infers that you always approach Stanley from this particular perspective on the left-hand side. And most of the theories and approaches that we use to deter Stanley from becoming an individual who abuses his organization's computer systems, we approach it from a field of mostly criminological approach, the field of criminology. that's warranted. But the vast majority of people, believe it or not, don't go into their organization every day and say, how can I screw stuff up? They just don't do it. And unfortunately, most of the organizational, I'll call it training awareness programs that organizations put in place are designed around the left-hand side. How do we deter the bad behavior? But the problem is most people don't want to engage in bad behavior to begin with. So the right-hand side here is coming from a positive psychology approach is how do we get Stanley to continue to keep doing what is right? And while they might seem necessarily opposites of each other, there's need for both. But we feel that there's a much more emphasis that needs to be given to the right-hand side than is given to the left-hand side. Right? We'd like to see a healthy dose of both of them. So these are our thoughts and approaches to cybersecurity from an organizational context. So let's talk about the project a little bit. 2020, it has been a year and it continues to be a year. And in a nutshell, we are interested in looking at all of the influences that impact what we call temporary work from home employees. These are employees that used to work in a traditional working environment full time, but either through their choice or their organization's choice or state mandates, they have been placed in a makeshift work environment. And as we'll see, there are a wide variety of work locations that people choose to operate in within their homes. But nonetheless, if I asked, I see there's a handful of participants here listening to us today. I could gather, several unique patterns or actions or thoughts about how 2020 and the COVID pandemic and the response to that pandemic has truly influenced the way you work, the way your subordinates work, the way your managers or supervisors work, so on and so forth. And it ain't always easy. I'm from the South, so ain't's a word in my book. I'll use that today. So it's been stressful. It has certainly been stressful, and it's just a different way of operating. So with those things in mind, here are our two main research questions with our approach right here is number one, what are the cybersecurity ramifications to organizations due to so many temporary work from home employees? And then two, what are these new stressors that are being placed on these employees that could impact their work processes and ultimately their cybersecurity related actions? So we don't know exactly when we began this study what we were going to find. So our presentation tonight will cover two distinct parts of our research. The first part is a qualitative study, going out and interviewing individuals for information about what their daily life activity is like, how many people are in their house, what are these new stressors. And then the second part is to take those themes, if you will, or patterns that emerged from our interviews and collect data through an intensive longitudinal study. So the study is actually, we interview them, and then an entirely different set of over 300 temporary work from home employees over a 2-week time period. So we follow them over a 2-week time period for every work day there, Monday through Friday. So I don't want to go into too much detail about how we did it, because I'd like to cover the major takeaways and then leave ample time for Q&A for individuals here who are in the audience who might be struggling with I don't have all the answers. My team doesn't have all the answers, but I do want to provide enough time for you to ask questions about our findings and maybe things that we haven't yet considered. So our first stage were the interviews. So we're looking at 18 individuals who are 18 years of older. These are individuals who are not self-employed, who work full-time, and they must have made a transition to work from home due to the pandemic. They can't be the individuals that were already working from home and the pandemic really didn't influence the way they worked very much. We wanted to be able to get insight from from a sample of the population in the United States that's most adversely affected by our shift in work processes. So we were able to get 17 women and 19 men from various industries, software and technology, education, state and local government, energy utilities, you name it. Now, I will throw this caveat out here is that most of our participants in our two-phase studies, they did not identify themselves as working for nonprofits. I understand that this is cybersecurity for nonprofits, but having said that, I think what we're able to learn from this data set is as applicable for-profit companies as it is nonprofit companies. So most of them had an average tenure with their organization of almost 5 years, and that varied from a couple of months to 20 years in there. And we conducted, or more specifically, our colleagues Richie and Alyssa ended up conducting some semi-structured phone interviews that lasted about 30 minutes with these individuals. And so let's talk a little bit about the basic information that we were able to glean from the questions in our interviews here. So the first thing that we wanted to look at was how much did they work at home or from home before the COVID pandemic versus what they're working during. And this should not come as a surprise. So the average was 10% to 95% there. That certainly makes sense. Working location in the house, there was a wide variety. It went from an office that was already set up to a makeshift office in a closet in a bedroom, to the kitchen, to the lanai outside, sunroom, whatever it is. Interestingly enough, no one mentioned the bathroom, and I know that was a lie. People do work from the bathroom there, but no one mentioned that. Something interesting from a BYOD policy is the ownership of the digital devices that individuals have. We found probably 50% of our interviewees owned their digital devices that they worked from. And then the others were a mix of purely organizational or a mix of personal and organizational. And so when you have so many people working in these home-based environments, especially those of you like myself with children, we love them, but we don't always like them. And they can wreak havoc on our digital devices. So it's going to be truly interesting to see what happens when we all plug back in our traditional work environments for those that do allow bring your own devices at work. We really delved into what we saw were shifts in workflow, really trying to look at, at a high level efficiency and effectiveness, but go to a more granular level, looking at, how are individuals' workflows and stresses in those processes being altered. So as you would expect on the top row, there's fewer non-work distraction. Yeah, and they have more non-work distractions. That confused me for a minute. So over half of the individuals had more non-work distractions or interruptions in their job, much like my son, who was just trying to come in just a second ago in my home office. I didn't know if you caught that. So we have more non-work interruptions and fewer work distractions or interruptions. Most believe they had more structure. Flexibility was a significant component. Those of you who are living in large cities, I saw someone come in from LA in California, and I understand that there's a little bit of traffic out there at times. So I would imagine if you're working from home, you might like the amount of time that you're saving from not having to commute back and forth in Los Angeles. There is an interesting trade-off we'll talk about in just a minute between efficiency and what some people view as productivity. While some people actually believe they were more productive, they seemed to be much less efficient from our interviews. Okay, we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in here in just a minute. Now, how did the organization respond to this temporary work from home pandemic that we faced? let's take a look at the information security policies and procedures. So the work from home cybersecurity policies, 50% of our sample said they were formed before COVID. So those organizations were a little bit more prepared, whereas 38% said it was formed due to COVID, or after the initial onslaught of the pandemic. And then the work from home policy being altered during COVID, 44% no and 38% yes. Now, for those of you who are mathematically inclined, you're probably screaming at me, why doesn't this amount to 100%? And that's a good question to ask. The reason why that is the case is the other responses were a simple, I don't know. So we've got some individuals who are working under a work from home policy that was established before COVID, some working under a policy that was formed because of COVID, and then even those that were formed during COVID, was it altered? And so we'll see here in a little bit what change to an individual's work environment can mean to their cybersecurity behavior. And then for those who answered, I don't know, we're not sure exactly if that's a good thing. We think it's a less of a good thing than it is a good thing for them just not to know about their cybersecurity policies as they deal from work from home environments. So I pull out a couple of verbatim citations here, but what I want to focus on is that there's pros and cons. There's no clear-cut I guess path that's completely con, and no clear-cut path that's completely pro. There's a lot of balancing going on. So some individuals said it's less difficult to follow. They simply thought that their organization was almost automating everything that they needed to do in a cybersecurity realm. They seemed more focused because they were seeing updates frequently, or seeing emails saying, hey, stay vigilant, stay mindful of these issues. And some even said it's less invasive. Well, the cons are almost the opposite of that. Some people just said it was just more difficult to follow, just much more extra steps of having to change around my home environment to maybe I need to get on a more protected network. I have to install a brand new VPN to make it more secure for my house. So I feel less focused. This individual at the bottom says, I have so many other things to focus on. Plus my kids have been using my computer, my work computer. Now I know for those of you who are responsible for cybersecurity in your organizations are probably cringing about that one thing, but you have to know that that is occurring on an almost daily basis with individuals with children. And then some people, because it is their personal environment, as opposed to the traditional organizational environment, there's a increased sensitivity, we felt like, to what are perceived invasions of privacy. Because it's one thing to put a monitoring system on someone's workstation at their desk in the traditional organizational environment, and it's almost perceived to be an entirely different thing when you do it on someone's personal workstation in their personal workspace at home. So we'll see just how big of a detriment that is in the near future here. So 36 individuals, there's not tons of generalization that we can glean from this. But again, I said, these components that we learned from our interviews, we turned around and issued surveys to see how widespread some of those things were. But here are some takeaways. In the IO psychology literature, we're academicians, there are different types of conflicts that individuals, I guess, have the opportunity to experience. Most of the time, it has been looked at like work to family conflict. Something happened at work and I go home and it influences the way I treat my family when I get home. But there's the converse of that. There are things that can happen within the family that can end up conflicting with what an individual needs to do in his or her daily work. And so this environment, what we are experiencing right now due to COVID, is almost the perfect scenario to understand the directionality there? Is it people who are frustrated with their work and that ends up translating into harming their family? And by I mean harming is not acting in a way that they would like to necessarily, or is it stuff like children coming in during important presentations that causes us to have stress with our work and slough off on certain things because we're worried about that? Lots of variety of locations in and around the home. Now, should this matter to your organization? And so I'm going to do something right now to see if it works. But Alexa, what is tomorrow's weather? Now, I don't know how many people have Alexas in their room right now, but I would imagine there's at least a few who are going off. And so not to say that Alexa is bad or anything, but there are potential vulnerabilities where we could enable listening functions on some of our smart devices. And so does it really matter? I see some things popping up, probably thanking me for doing that. But does this matter to your organization? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Another concept that we picked up was something we call time chunking. It appears to be quite a significant issue for temporary work from home employees, because rather than individuals sitting down at their workstation from 8 to 5 and taking a 30-minute break in the morning, a 30-minute break in the afternoon, and a 45-minute break at lunch, we're starting to see these patterns emerge with at least a handful of temporary work from home individuals, where they will start at 7:30, go to 9:30, go to one of their kids' plays, go have lunch with one of their friends, come back and work, go to a soccer game, come back and finish working at 10 p.m. So their day has been elongated, but it's broken up into different chunks. And so there are certain proclivities or psychological characteristics that enable some individuals to handle that time chunking and actually prefer that over some individuals. And we think that's a potential important component to look at, which is what we did. There's almost, and along with that time chunking, there seems to be a trade-off potentially between doing things with minimal resources and being effective. It seems like with efficiency, they've slowed down in efficiency, but the time that they are at their desk, some of them said that they might be more effective. Well, again, like the other things I said, we'll look at that in just a minute. And then if you're an organization that allows bring your own device from employees, we've got to really be careful because of the number of applications that are being used by others in the home, most often smaller children who are downloading games and playing them and not realizing they might have some malicious content on them. So that's our interview one, our stage one takeaways from our set of interviews. So moving on from our interviews to something more generalizable, we took what we found in those patterns from the interviews and embedded them in our surveys. And so let me set the frame here for you. We've got between 300 and 350 temporary work from home individuals across all different industries. We issue one survey to them to get some demographic information. But for the next Monday, the 2 Monday through Friday work weeks, we ask them to complete a short survey at the end of their workday every day. So each individual, we have one with demographic information, and then each individual has at least 8 and up to 10 daily surveys. So what we're trying to see is, is what we see in kind of a snapshot picture, an ad hoc, cross-sectional time frame, not ad hoc, but cross-sectional time frame, does it hold across multiple work days and even work weeks? So demographics of the participants: still 18 years or older, employed full-time, not self-employed. They need to still be working from home because of the pandemic. Okay. There's the individuals, the percentage that work in IS and IT domains, number of managers and females. And then at the bottom, it's a possible of 11 surveys in total. So what did we find here? What exactly did we find? Well, interestingly, on the left-hand side, one of the things that we asked them every day was, what amount of work were you able to get accomplished today that you set out to. So if it was exactly what you set it out to be and you accomplished all of that, it would be 100%. As you would expect, some people get bogged down, some people get busy with other things, and that percent of work accomplished ends up decreasing from that mid-level point. But opposite of that, we see individuals who might have been able to thrive in these environments. And we've even seen, not that this is necessarily a good thing, but we saw individuals who were putting in 18 and 20 hours and getting a lot more done on time sensitive documents than they would otherwise. Another interesting phenomenon that we wanted to find out is, do individuals believe that their home base environment is more secure than their traditional work environment? And that's a fairly normal distribution there on the right side, but we see a pretty good variation. Of course, in the middle is going to be the 4. That's what 1 is going to be less secure, 7 is going to be more secure, and less likely, I mean, strongly disagree and strongly agree there. So there's some variation. Some of the employees out there think that their home-based environment is not more secure than their organization, the traditional network. And then some people actually believe that it is. As I was mentioning to Bob last night, is one of the important things that I don't want to say harp on, but one of the things I want to stress on tonight is that behaviors are important, yes, but perception is reality in many cases. So if an individual believes that their home-based environment is more secure than their traditional work environment, they might be more prone to doing things in their home-based environment than they would in their traditional work environment. Now, again, truth doesn't matter there necessarily. It is their perception. So it is very important for us to understand what the Stanleys of the world are thinking. Now, what I want to do here, I think, Bob, are you able to issue the polls from your screen?
Yeah, I can go ahead and do that.
Okay, so go ahead and issue the anonymous poll 1 about breaches.
It should be up there.
Okay.
Whoops.
Let's see. I think you want to close out that one. And it could be, it might say polling number 2, which is breaches.
Oh, okay. Hold on. Oh, that's strange.
Is it not allowing you? So at the very top, Bob, there should be a drop down arrow.
Hey guys, I can get it. I can get
okay.
it.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Oops, sorry. Yeah, I didn't
No
have
problem.
Sorry to put you on the spot, Bob. There we are. All right,
No.
this is anonymous. This is anonymous. So how many breaches has your organization experienced since COVID began? Don't be shy. Okay, so we've got a brave soul, at least. Okay. So yeah, this is completely anonymous, and we want to see if you are able to line up with what we found in our surveys here. I guess there's a difference in known breaches and unknown breaches, right? So these would be the known breaches. So it looks like we got half.
Still voting.
Still voting. Now, in order to get your CPE credits, people, you have to vote. It's mandatory. Even though it's anonymous, we're just gonna, you know.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. All right, so it looks like we've got 4 individuals who haven't voted. Go ahead and kill that for us, Bob. All right. All right, so we sharing the results. Most of you said 0, right? 77%, 1 to 2, there was 1, 3 to 5 is 2. And so that's what we would expect here. So out of the 300 and something individuals whom we surveyed, this is what the chart looks like. Okay, And again, these are their perceptions. So this might not be completely factual, but this is their best recollection since COVID began. How many times has their organization been breached? So the vast majority said 0, like the majority here. We had about 35, so 10% said 1, even few, maybe 4% said 2, 3, and then you go on down. We did have 2 who responded 13. Now, whether that was in a factual number or they were just saying 13's unlucky, I might as well put it because we're still dealing with 2020. Why not? We're not sure, but that is the distribution, the perceived distribution, if you will, of the number of breaches for those organizations since COVID began. Now, I'm going to throw out a lot of graphs here, but I want to put it out here, not that I'm going to speak about every single one in depth, but if you have any at the end of the presentation in Q&A, if there's any topic that you might want us to elaborate on, we're happy to. So at the top row, we see that there's a significant decrease in the collaboration with colleagues, which we expect. We see an increase in non-work distractions. In work-based distractions, we have fewer, so it's to the left side. But job autonomy, it really does seem like individuals perceive that they have a significantly more amount autonomy in the way that they perform their daily tasks. And so from the literature, we know that people are more satisfied with their job and have more positive affect to their organization when they have more autonomy in their job. They are the ones who are in control. We did see a slight decrease in the perception of access to resources. And a lot of times this was embodied by not being able to walk down the hallway and talk with one's colleague and had to send an email or go through some type of chat message function or Microsoft Teams and somewhat wait for a response. They felt like they had a little bit less access to resources than they did in the traditional work environment. But look at the amount of work. They're telling us that we'll see that they think they're more efficient and effective, but they're also saying that they believe that they have significantly more work to do in their temporary work from home environment than they did traditional. Now, again, I don't know if that's true. These are the perceptions. Time on digital devices, that certainly makes sense that they are on digital devices so much more in the work from home environment than they are in the traditional environment. And then schedule flexibility, the ability to time chunk, if you will, to add some variation in there is significantly higher than it is in the traditional environment. And then the last 2 slides in this regard are, whereas there seemed to be this kind of trade-off during the interviews between efficiency and effectiveness, we really didn't see that when we went to a larger quantitative study of over 300 individuals. People most often said they thought they were much more efficient and much more effective than they were in the traditional work environment.
Hey, Clay, we have one question come in. Did you see that?
Sure. I go ahead if you can ask me that.
Yeah, a couple questions. One is from Thomas: working from home can leverage more security. If everyone is working from different IPs, this should reduce the attack vectors for individuals. Taking into consideration proper cybersecurity policies are followed. Is this something that your research has seen?
As far as the differences in IP addresses, is that what the question is about?
I believe that's what he's asking now.
I know that with the survey we were able to collect the IP addresses, but we haven't looked at any of that information right now.
Okay, and another one, and does working from home can cause micromanaging managers to get antsy, right? So, and did your research look at perception or perceptions from the manager's point of view, not the employees working from home?
Well, that's a very good question. So I guess I should have prefaced this by saying this second stage of data that we've got, it just arrived like within the last week and a half. And we haven't delved into it. But what we haven't done, but we can do, because it's almost a 50-50 split between non-managers and managers here, is that we could do these similar charts between those two groups. We have not yet done that to look at the differences in perception, but that is definitely something that we do need to look into.
Okay, good. Okay.
And thank you for the questions. Feel free to ask them.
Yeah, keep asking.
All right, so gee, Dr. Posey, you've been sitting here talking about all these things that are peripheral to what we're here to learn about with cybersecurity, and they're really not. Remember, I said all of those things at the top that compound on Stanley can really influence his impact on the organization, even from his temporary work from home environment. So what does this mean for cybersecurity? Well, if I asked you, how often do you follow your organization's cybersecurity policies and procedures with 100% exactness for a given day? Would you be, I know it's anonymous, right? But so this is rhetorical. Do you really believe that you follow it 100% every single time, or do you kind of slough off a little bit? So these are the thousands of surveys that we compiled of individuals that we focused on, those 300 individuals that we focused on for 2 weeks. And this is what they told us, right? So this is the distribution here. We see a large component is between 95 and 100%, but we do see some individuals maybe not have such good days. So you might be thinking, wow, that's not bad at all. That's pretty good. And I can provide some other information from another context that might provide some more insight here. But that's what this means is this. It's 94.7 adherence with exactness. I didn't deviate one iota from policies. One other way to think about that, though, is 1 in 20. One time in every 20 opportunities, whether that's somebody, putting together some type of invoice for a widget, responding to an email, whatever it might be. So I asked the individuals here, is 1 in 20 good enough? So 1 out of every 20, I don't follow it with exactness. And I can't answer that for you in your particular organization. The only thing I know is I'm giving you the information that we found. So if you were able to do this with your own employees, you might be able to do a check. Now, I will throw a caveat out there, is for the same reason that I made the polls anonymous here tonight, is when you're an organization and you go and ask your employees to give you accurate and honest information, that's probably going to look a little bit different. That peak is probably going to be a good bit higher because they don't know if their information is truly confidential if you're collecting their IP address, for example. So I would just throw that caveat out there that if you're going to use this as a metric, just know you have to do your best to approach your employees in the most confidential way and try to make it anonymous, whether you force them to use Tor browsers, Tor network, or whatever it is. I don't know. Okay.
Clay, can I ask a question? If you could extrapolate that data into an organization that has thousands of employees, right? Let's say it stays at 5%. Well, 5% across an employee base of 1,000 employees, that's pretty scary in terms of threat vectors, right? If you
it is
that number out, so you can understand why phishing is such a threat to companies.
Yeah, and so the findings that we'll get into from the second study definitely speak to that, because we don't want to necessarily get to the point where, just because I think Bob and you and I were talking about this last night, is we don't want to get to a point where we're firing people for making a true mistake.
Right.
Because what that engenders in our culture is, well, if somebody made an honest mistake for something and they get fired, everybody else who knew that person who got fired is going to be afraid to hit the enter key when they send an email.
Yep.
So we have to be careful how we respond to these, I'll call them non-malicious, non-compliance issues. Okay. And that's a key distinction between malicious and non-malicious, right? So here is the other poll. And Bob or Chuck, I think this says poll 3, but I would like to get feedback from the audience members about what they believe, why they believe, excuse me, their beliefs as to why employees did not follow protocol. Which of these options is the most likely thing in your mind as to why the employees did not follow protocol? All right, so we're almost halfway there.
While we're waiting for that, Clay, your statement before is relevant because I've run into this dealing with customers and clients, and you know, you don't want to punish people for making a mistake of effort, right? And that happens. Unfortunately, I think that happens too often in companies.
It's true, you know, it's the model of the carrot or the stick.
Yep.
You'll catch a lot more flies with honey than you will with vinegar. And we don't want to punish mostly good people when they do mostly good and
Right.
they slip up a little bit. What we want to catch, hopefully, we want to motivate those people to build up the good stuff that's inside of them and their motivations there. But when it comes down to it, and let's see, no one's clicking the fourth option. So I can say that, you know, it makes a really great news story when an insider does something maliciously, but that by and large doesn't happen as often as these other cases, right? Okay, so we've got 55%, which or who think that security just gets in the way of their job tasks. So let's do this. Is look at the data, what they show us. So we came up with 13 various reasons why people do maybe counterproductive things in their workplace. And this comes from Dr. Schoss's work out of IO Psychology, is let's not only figure out the number or the metric for daily non-adherence and give it a percentage, but let's then, when they deviate from 100, let's ask them why so. And so the most significant one is reason number 4. And I'm not going to go through all of these, but reason number 4 is to better accomplish tasks for my job, right? That's the vast majority of the reason why people didn't adhere. They just want to better accomplish tasks for their job. Similar to that is to get something they needed. And I think this is where the majority of incidents come into play with what we call shadow IT. Shadow IT of individuals downloading and installing applications and software, not because they want to be malicious, they're just doing it subverting proper procedure because they need it now to do their job as opposed to waiting for approval to get something done. And nowhere is that more detrimental than in organizations where individuals are compensated based on productivity levels. So if I am evaluated on, I'll use the proverbial widget, right? If somebody is evaluated on how many widgets they are able to produce a day, and they can utilize this thing and install it now and get done with their work today faster than holding off for an hour and waiting to see if somebody signed off on it. Almost always they're going to select the first. And there's a statement I go by, and I'll call it one of my axioms, right? So between two choices, between choice A or choice one of doing some of your work in a completely secure fashion versus option two, doing all of your work in a somewhat secure fashion, and I hope I got that right, it's been a long day, the vast majority of individuals are going to always choose the option, I'm going to get all of my work done in a somewhat secure manner, right? That doesn't mean they're bad necessarily. It can have ramifications, but that doesn't mean they're trying to harm the organization. And that's important because the mechanisms that deter truly malicious behavior are not the same mechanisms that deter these other reasons for non-adherence. And this other one is really quite interesting, is to help others get their work done. So one of the purposes that we wanted to look at in our research is there's some research that says, when individuals experience a catastrophe, when they experience a major pandemic, something affects a lot of people in a horrible way, like Hurricane Katrina or famine or mudslides or whatever, we see a handful of individuals kind of step up and be this super altruistic individual. And so it's almost like this is also occurring for individuals here, is that they're willing potentially to be punished for not adhering to their cybersecurity policy of their organization, as long as it means helping someone in their network get things done. Now, it's good that I was expecting some individuals to fall for it, if you will, but where retaliation lies for a perceived injustice, trying to do harm or whatever, it's one right here. And so I ask you, to reflect on your cybersecurity policies and procedures. Are they written from the standpoint of trying to deter this behavior down here that is reason number one, or is it really focused on the peaks rather than the valleys in this particular chart? And if not, I would encourage you to go back and look at your documentation there and see how you're approaching your individual employees. So I see that it's 8:24. Let me go through the remainder fairly quick. I realize people's time is important. So inside that reason number 13, these were some of the comments that we were able to pull out from the participants that didn't fit very neatly into one of those buckets, if you will. So people just said it wasn't necessary. The second one really kind of bothers me because it impedes my productivity, and the only concern is my laptop being stolen, which isn't really a concern. So I feel some of you cringing right now, and it should. We saw some issues of technology mishaps and reboots coming on. This one right here, I had a family emergency and couldn't fully focus on my job, and that makes sense. And then the last one, it would have taken more time and I was bored. Now, don't walk away here thinking that the vast majority of people just said they're doing it because they're bored. But we do have some individuals who are bored and just want to surf personal websites. They're not trying to hurt the organization, but they are potentially doing things that aren't up to snuff. Okay, so interesting correlations. I showed you the distributions, and we think it's much more important to show those as opposed to just a mean metric and a standard deviation. That really doesn't tell you much if the distribution is not normally distributed. But from our initial analysis, our initial dive into the data, if you are trying to promote protective stewards in your organization during this time, and I would argue this also does apply to a significant degree in the traditional work environment, but moving forward with the work from home environment, there's really only two things that we found that had significantly high correlations in the surveys with individuals, what we call protective motivated behaviors. The vast majority of it's influenced by attitude. And what I say by attitude means the perception that the employees believe that the cybersecurity standards of the organization are important, are needed, are necessary, right? It's needed for my job. So it's one thing to tell employees to do something, but it's another thing to tell employees to do something because. If you're missing the because, the attitude is going to be significantly impacted by individuals in your organization. We'll talk about mindlessness here in a minute, but across a wide gamut of what we call constructs or factors, these are the only two that really had a significant role or impact or effect on positive protective behaviors. Now, if we look at the converse of that, we look at the abusive behaviors, the Stanleys that take their bats out and do an office space on their workstation. A lot more facets come out that are significantly influence individuals' reported behaviors and intentions to do something, cover up something in the database, to intentionally go around and potentially cause harm to the organization. So constant changes in the environment, that is one of the reasons why we asked our participants very early on, how frequently does your organization update and hopefully improve its cybersecurity standards during this time period? Well, too many changes can have an adverse effect for sure. One of the things that we noticed in the interviews, and I'm certainly glad we captured it, is individuals are particularly sensitive about perceived privacy invasions during this time, both an invasion of privacy as well as monitoring. So Bob, that goes to the comment or the question in the Q&A portion about micromanaging. We have to be extremely careful here that the individuals do not perceive that they are being monitored every single step of the way, because remember, these are their personal environments. And it could be that you're monitoring the exact same way that you would in their traditional environment. It's just their mind frame is, now you're at my home. Do you really need to do this or that? So we need to keep that into our frame of mind. How much workflow is impeded by following a cybersecurity policy and procedure, whether their job is ambiguous, if they're just sitting at their workstation every day and they don't know exactly what's expected of them this day and it's constantly changing, that's not going to be a good thing. Going back to whether it's work to family or family to work conflict, actually family to work conflict had a bigger issue. Now, what does this mean for employees that have many family members and everything in their daily lives? You can't prohibit that, but it's something to keep in mind. And so we'll offer just a little bit of advice here on the next slide to take with you. So here's some final takeaways. You got to consider the workflow. In the poll, I'm glad most of you admitted or believe or perceive that most of the people don't adhere to policies and procedures because they just want to get stuff done. Well, unfortunately, security isn't always synonymous with efficiency. And so we really need to take a step back, especially in today's environment where so many people are forced out of their traditional environment into their makeshift environment. And we have to consider workflow. We have to consider perceptions and invasions of privacy and monitoring. Again, perceptions, it's reality for them. It might not be reality for the manager who implements it, but it is the reality and perceptions for the employee. Evaluate the changes to the policies and procedures before you push them out. Make sure they're all necessary and make sure you explain why they are being implemented. Don't be afraid to truly educate your users as to why a hacker group would want that sensitive information. What's going to happen out on the black market? What's going to happen to our consumer base? Don't be afraid to spend a few minutes talking about that, because that additional time provides them the context to understand why it is necessary. Don't just think that because you say it's necessary, they're going to go ahead and go through with it. Positive attitude means a lot. you might want to think about ways to encourage your employees to take breaks from being in front of their digital devices. Anything you can do to reduce the stress levels at this time so that they can come and be mindful when they are sitting in front of their makeshift workstation rather than mindless. So if any of you who are coming from a military background understand situational awareness, mindlessness is almost the exact opposite of that. It's you're clicking emails, you're doing clicks, you're not even realizing what you're doing. Heck, I don't necessarily remember what I had for dinner last night and kind of cruise through it. I'm almost mindless as I went through it. So we want to do what we can to make sure that our employees are mindful in their temporary work environments. And then to go to Bob's point about phishing, the third highest or the third most frequent reason for individuals not adhering to their organization's policies and procedures is due to them trying to help each other. And so that is a definite weakness when we start talking about spear phishing campaigns and especially business email compromise scams, because they are always going to start with something that's time sensitive. Hey, I'm a supervisor. Can you help me with this thing? And they could be more prone to succumbing to that right now because they're the mindset, hey, I'm in a pandemic. I need to help other individuals out than more so than what I normally would. I need to be nice during this time. People are having a hard time. And so we would encourage you to maybe have your employees revisit that and explain why you're revisiting business email compromise because of individuals' proclivities to have an increase in altruistic behaviors during this time set. So I realize I'm right at an hour. I just want to again mention our team. I'm Clay Posey with my colleagues, Dr. Mindy Schoss, Alyssa Perez, and Richard Curry, who are out of the Industrial Organizational Psychology program here at UCF. And so with that, I'm going to stop my screen share and open it up to any questions that have risen during the presentation. All right, Thomas Harper writes, what's the best approach to transition the older workforce to work from home setups? Excellent question. We did collect age as a demographic variable in our research, but we don't have the answer to that right now. Mindy, if you have an inclination as to how to implement that, I know that is a significant issue, but I don't want to put you in the spotlight if you don't have a direct answer. So.
Sure. Well, I guess my suggestion would be to start and try to really diagnose what the issue is, because, I think we do generally and probably partially correctly so associate, age with technology experience. But that's not always correct. And sometimes we see these issues show up in, younger workers as well. So I think maybe trying to really figure out what are the main challenges. Is it is it an education issue? Is it a workload issue? Is it a comfort? And perhaps try to get at it that way and look across the workforce.
Yep, exactly. The Alan asked, is there a balance? And surely you jest at a balance. No, in truth, there has to be, but I can't throw out a blanket statement and say every individual employee is the same and every organization is the same. I did publish some research that looked at this interplay between individuals giving up their privacy for more security. And I'm happy to share that with Bob, and he can put it on the CSNP site. But it talks about the factors that people consider when they are doing that balance between cybersecurity and privacy. And the way we look at privacy, that's the confidentiality. That's the C in the CIA triad. whereas security is the bigger umbrella term there. So they're related, but they're not the same thing. I hate to give you the MBA answer, is that it depends. But there are some factors in previous research that kind of help us look at that. Now, the true question is that when they are using their personal devices, there has to be some contextual differences when, if you are the organization and you have provided this particular device to the employee to work from home, their invasion, I guess, calculus, if you will, is going to differ, I'm willing to bet, than if it was, it's their own personal laptop. And we haven't even started to look at, does it matter if it's their private network? So you might have given them access to an organizational device, computing device, but they are still using likely their personal network and private network. Maybe if the organization helped pay and cover for that internet access, that might alleviate some of that. But I would hate, Alan, to give you a blanket statement and you go into your organization and say, well, here's the magic formula for this. I do believe that there is a balance there, but I don't think I can provide you a metric that is going to be necessarily accurate for your organization.
Hey, Clay, let me offer some insights, because depending on what business sector you're in, right? And it's driven by compliance and policies. Healthcare, I can tell you that this has been a struggle for them since they had to go entirely digital transformation since COVID started. Everything is done remotely, telemedicine, right? And you talk about privacy issues and compliance and HIPAA regulations. So their policies in terms of their employees using personal devices, that's going to be driven by what business sector you're in, the policy of the company, and what regulations regulate that business sector. So
Yeah.
if you're an attorney working for own law firms, you have different regulations from the ABA and privacy concerns than you do in healthcare. So I would suspect a lot of that is driven by the business policy and compliance issues, depending on what business sector you're in. And we see that every day.
Right. So for the audience members here and those who listen to the recorded event at a later time, here is one piece of advice that I can strongly offer every organization. One of the best ways to help employees take ownership of the data with which they operate, stop approaching it and saying, if this happens, the organization's data is going to be lost. Most of the organizations collect data on consumers, on clients. So the best flip or technique that you can use to help them take ownership is, rather than saying, if this happens, organizational data is going to be lost, stop doing that. Say, if you do this, individuals who are very much like you are going to have their data stolen and potential identity theft, right? So it's still going to amount, or from an organization standpoint, the same amount of loss when it happens. But in the mindset of the employee, one of the best ways to motivate them is to change your framing of your message and say, stop referring it to the organization's data. In the United States, yeah, we know that's the case, but frame it in a way that it gets it closer to more salient, more relevant to the employee. And that's a key difference in a very simple thing that you can do in your organizations to begin shifting motivational aspects of your employees.
Good. Any other questions? Well, Clay, Mindy, Alicia, Richard, we really appreciate you taking the time, and thank you so much. This was great information for the group.
Yeah, thank you very much. And Bob, thanks for being a champion of new information, and also for the nonprofits out there. They don't always have the same amount of resources. So
well, we are a nonprofit, but we are made up of not nonprofit people.
Right.
So there's a lot of crossover, so it's very relevant. Your data and study speaks to a lot what we're seeing in the marketplace.
Yeah. And so remember, cybersecurity is more than the ones and zeros. Think about the Stanleys, think about all their pressure and stresses, and remember, the ways that you deter truly malicious behavior are not the same ways you try to halt this non-malicious non-compliance. The vast majority of people are just trying to get their work done.
Yep.
We need to really focus on workflow.
Yep, you're absolutely right. So if there's no more questions, wait, I might have one more. No, do we? How do we get organizational, employee, and customer interest to more closely align? There's one question.
Let's see. How do we get organizational, employee, and customer interests to more closely align? So I'm just going to take it from the organizational standpoint right here. Again, Bob and I were talking last night about the difficulty we have in getting C-level executives to understand the ramifications of cybersecurity. It's a difficult thing. So one of the things that we have heard about are cybersecurity teams within organizations looking at the vulnerabilities that a C-level executive's family members, in particular their children, might have on social media. So it's not necessarily specifically related to the organization, but if you are wanting them to begin paying attention to you, offer a free service to your C-level executives and your VP executives and say, and do it without them knowing about it, right? That makes it really fun. But you can approach them and say, look, our cybersecurity team has been investigating vulnerabilities. And use this. One of the vulnerabilities that C-level executives are being phished is through their children's social media accounts. That is truly the way that's happening. So you can position it that way, and you can approach them and say, hey, we've done an analysis on the types of information, OSINT, that is out there on your kids that could potentially lead to you. And here's what we found. And here's our advice moving forward. When you are able to make that transition with the C-level executives and go, oh my gosh, my children have opened up a vulnerability, I guarantee you they pay much more attention to you from that point moving forward.
That's a very good point. I can't tell how many times we're doing in forensics and intelligence gathering, and that's one of the first things we look at when we do that, social media.
Yeah, it is a detriment.
That's what the criminals are doing, trust me. It's the first thing they look at.
Absolutely. So I believe you will have a copy of this presentation. Anyone who's listening to it now has any additional questions, feel free to reach out to myself and my team members, and we'll help you where possible.
Hey, yeah, it's been great. So thank you so much. And I appreciate everybody attending. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.